So Indian universities and temples, they have attracted scholars from across the world, and this has resulted in a flow of knowledge to both the east and the west of India. Could you tell us about some of the scholars who actually enabled this, including both who came to India as well as some of the Indian scholars who went to various foreign lands?
Right. So this is a very vast topic, and I think it forms the longest chapter in the book that I'm almost finished, which will be out in April May. So I'll try to put it briefly. It's the longest chapter because so many scholars have come to India from outside, and so many have gone outside from India to other countries. It's very obvious since we had that great ecosystem that I mentioned, and we had universities with very difficult admission tests where only the most meritorious would be selected. So there were many students flocking to India to get admission into various universities, and not just universities but also to learn the skills. Even for that, India was very famous. So the students came from China, Korea, Japan, Indonesia, Western Asia. I mean, you name it, and they have come from that country. I heard about Mongolia. There were students from Mongolia. So basically, east, west, north, south, wherever there was a culture of learning, there was where learning was valued. Those countries sent their best students to study in India. And the most famous names, of course, are Fahia and Zhuangzhang. But there were many scholars who came from China, especially, who left behind very detailed accounts. And many of them made very difficult journeys. So the journey is also described that they went to this extent, almost got drowned in the seas, or or starved when they were walking across deserts. So all this in order to reach India and to learn from the gurus of India. Mind you, some of the gurus of India were so famous that the students already knew them by name when they came to try and get admission in those universities. And then many of these students, when they finished their learning, would take back manuscripts with them. They would copy them as much as they could, and then they would carry those manuscripts back. The Chinese, especially, have done a lot of that. It was considered a very holy duty to bring back Sanskrit manuscripts from India. Now, there were also many Indian scholars who went from India. So, for example, China's whole ecosystem of learning was set up by the Indians to a large extent. So we have names like Kashyapa Matanga, Dharmaratna, Sanghavarma, Dharma Satya, Dharmakala, Mahabala. I mean, there are scores of names. Kashmir provided a steady stream of scholars to China. Then from southern India, also there were scholars traveling all the way from the south to China. There is one name which comes as Dharmaruchi, who spent 20 years in China, and he translated some 53 works into Chinese. And many of these scholars, when they went from India to China, they were received with great fanfare by the kings themselves. They would go and receive them with fanfare and show them that they valued what they had come for. So it was a very tedious task of translating because Sanskrit and Chinese are so different. And yet there would be whole translation bureaus which were doing this job together. And also the Buddhist monks who traveled to China, they were well trained in medicine. So in this way, medical knowledge also got transmitted to China. So, Ayurveda, that's how it went to China. Ophthalmology, Indian ophthalmology was very much in demand. It was a very popular discipline. Gynecology, pediatrics, physical fitness. So the knowledge of all this was transferred by the Indian scholars to China, who went to China. Now, in the same way, knowledge of medicine was the first to be transmitted to Greece in ancient times. So if you read the works of John Royal, William Hunter, Johnston Saint, there are many authors who talk about how Indian knowledge of medicine was the basis of the medicine in the Western world. The Greeks and the Arabs took all that knowledge and translated it. So there is irrefutable evidence that just like medicine, the knowledge of mathematics, astronomy, grammar, logic, all this was transmitted from India via major translation movements. So the Arab translators, they mostly gave credit to their Indic sources. Mathematics itself was called Hindisa, which means that it came from Hindustan or India. And the works of early Muslim intellectuals like Al-Kindi, Al-Farabi, Al-Farghani, Al-Tabari, Al-Khwarizmi, all these famous intellectuals during the early Islamic period when it had not become very rigid and intolerant as it became later. So these scholars, they transferred the Indic knowledge to the Islamic world. And then after that, this was from Arabic, it was translated to Latin, again via a major translation movement. So one of the major centers of translation was Toledo in Spain, where all these Arabic works were translated to Latin. Okay, the mathematical works, the scientific works. So the Indian mathematician C.K. Raju has done a lot of good work. I would recommend that you should read his works to know more about it. So, for example, Fibonacci, the famous Fibonacci, he played a predominant role in changing mindsets and telling the Europeans to use the Indic way of doing arithmetic. He called it modus indorum, and the method of the Hindus that should be used to do account keeping, balancing your accounts, doing your addition, subtraction, because that's a better way. And that has been mentioned by Fibonacci, right? So there has been a constant movement of knowledge via translation movements. So if you start looking at the translation movement, you'll see that. So there was no, if you look at the Renaissance, European Renaissance, suddenly a whole lot of books came out and it seemed like the golden period, but that was actually because of the translation that was done, the translation of the Arabic works to Latin, and all these books were suddenly made available. And so it became a renaissance for them. But if you see the core of that knowledge, it's all Indian. And the same thing happened when the colonizers started coming to India, then there was another wave of knowledge transfer. So whether you take the Portuguese or the French or the Dutch, they all collected a large number of manuscripts because they were very interested to know what is in those manuscripts. And then they would translate them and they would write papers on them, which would be published in journals in Europe. That's the way it worked. And the British collected the largest number of Indic works, and even today you'll find them scattered across their museums and various storing centers. So I have synthesized a lot of this knowledge in my book to show how India was the source of so much knowledge. I would invite everybody to read the book, and we should get our history right.
Absolutely, Sahana ji. That is absolutely fascinating, and there is so much that probably most of us are not aware about. But thank you for those very rich insights.
Namaste. We hope you enjoyed this Chitti Media content. Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.